It is past midnight on a stone causeway across a black lake in the pouring rain, and the men who came to conquer an empire are drowning. They are drowning because they are greedy. Their pockets, their packs, their armor are stuffed with looted gold. And when they fall into the water, the gold pulls them straight down. Behind them, 1,000 canoes. Above them, a city that has finally turned on its guests. By dawn, most of the invaders will be dead. The empire has won. The strangers have been broken and thrown into the lake. And yet, 14 months from this night, this city, the largest in the Americas, one of the largest on Earth, will be a smoking ruin. Its emperor dead, its people starving, its temples pulled down, stone by stone. So how do the winners of this night lose everything? The answer you were taught in school, a few hundred brave Spaniards toppling a mighty empire, is almost entirely wrong. The real story is stranger, darker, and far more human. This is how Tenochtitlan fell. Rewind, the spring of 1519. A Spanish adventurer named Hernán Cortés lands on the coast of Mexico with about 500 men, 16 horses, and no permission to be there. Ahead of him, somewhere inland, is the Aztec Empire. Millions of people, ruled from a capital no European has ever seen. Behind him, on the coast, his own governor is already trying to have him arrested and recalled. So Cortés does something that looks like madness. He wrecks his own ships. He runs them aground, strips them, and sinks the fleet in the shallows, so that not one of his men can sail home. For centuries, the legend said he burned them, a grand gesture of no retreat. He didn't. That story was painted 40 years later. The truth is colder. Cortés had already committed what Spain would call treason. If he crawled back empty-handed, the crown would execute him. Forward was not brave. Forward was the only way he lived. But 500 men cannot take an empire of millions. To have any chance, Cortés needs an army. And he is about to find one in the last place you would expect, among the empire's own people. Here is the first thing the myth gets wrong. This was never 500 Spaniards versus the Aztecs. The Aztec Empire ruled by fear. It taxed its neighbors and took their people for sacrifice, and it had made a great many enemies. When Cortés marched inland, he reached Tlaxcalan, a nation the Aztecs had fought for generations and never conquered. The Tlaxcalans fought the Spanish first, hard, and then made a colder calculation. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. They gave Cortés thousands of warriors. Over the war to come, indigenous allies on the Spanish side would number in the tens of thousands, by some counts as many as 200,000. The Spanish were never the army. They were a spear point on an army that was overwhelmingly native, and Cortés had one more weapon, a person, an enslaved woman the Spanish called Doña Marina, whom history remembers as Malintzin. She spoke Nahuatl and quickly Spanish, and she became Cortés's voice, his negotiator, his mind. Without her, he is a mute stranger. With her, he can turn a continent's rivalries against its center. And astonishingly, the Aztec emperor invites him in. November 1519. The Spaniards climb the mountain pass and stop and stare. Below them, on an island in a shining lake, stands Tenochtitlan, a city of perhaps 250,000 people, larger than any city in Europe. Stone causeways run out across the water, canoes fill the canals, pyramids blaze white in the sun. One of the soldiers, Bernal Díaz, wrote that they wondered whether they were dreaming. At the head of the great causeway waits the emperor, Moctezuma II, and he receives Cortés not as an enemy, but as an honored guest, with gold and a palace to stay in. Why? The famous answer is that Moctezuma mistook Cortés for a returning god. But that story, too, was written after the conquest, and most historians now think it a myth, invented to make the defeat feel like fate. The likelier truth is simpler: a cautious ruler choosing to bring a dangerous newcomer close. It was a fatal choice, because within days, the guest turned on the host. Cortés seized Moctezuma inside his own palace and began to rule an empire through its captive king. It was a bluff, and bluffs run out. The bluff held for months, until two things broke it at once. First, Spain caught up with him. A second Spanish force landed on the coast, sent to arrest Cortés for treason. He marched out, defeated them in a night attack, and folded their men into his own. He had won. But while he was gone, he had left the capital to a hot-headed deputy, Pedro de Alvarado. And Alvarado did something catastrophic. During a sacred festival, with the unarmed nobility of Tenochtitlan dancing in the temple courtyard, he ordered his men to fall on them and killed the flower of the city's leadership in a single afternoon. Cortés returned to a city at war. Cornered, he pushed his captive emperor onto a rooftop to beg his people for calm. Moments later, Moctezuma was dead, and even his death is a mystery the sources will not agree on. The Spanish said his own people struck him down with stones. The Aztecs said the Spanish killed him when he was no longer useful. However he died, the meaning was clear. There was no puppet king left to hide behind, only hundreds of thousands of enraged people between the Spanish and dry land. There was one option left: run. And now, we are back where we began. The night of the 30th of June, 1520, a rainstorm for cover. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies creep out along the western causeway, carrying a portable bridge to span the gaps where the drawbridges have been pulled up, and carrying, against all sense, as much of the emperor's treasure as they can drag. A woman drawing water sees them. The alarm goes up, and the lake erupts. Canoes swarm the causeway from both sides. Spears and stones and arrows come out of the dark. The bridge jams. The gaps fill with the drowning and the dead. And here is the cruelest detail. The men who had stuffed themselves with gold could not swim under its weight. The treasure they came for pulled them straight to the bottom. By morning, Cortés had lost perhaps 2/3 of his Spaniards and thousands of his allies. The soldiers called it La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. Cortés, the sources say, sat under a tree and wept. The empire had crushed the invasion. By every rule of war, it was over. But something had already slipped into the city that no wall could keep out, and no warrior could fight. And it was about to do what the whole Aztec army could not. The weapon that broke Tenochtitlan was not steel, or gunpowder, or horses. It was a virus. Somewhere in the fighting, a single infected man, most likely from that second Spanish force, carried smallpox into the valley. The people of the Americas had never met this disease, and had no defense against it whatsoever. It moved through Tenochtitlan like fire through dry grass. The Aztec accounts are almost unbearable to read, of bodies covered in sores so dense that the sick could not move, could not lie down, could not be touched, of whole families dying together, of no one left well enough to bring the others water. In perhaps 60 days, it may have killed 1/3 or more of the people in the city, and it killed the man who had beaten Cortés. Cuauhtemoc, the leader who drove the Spanish out on the Night of Sorrows, was dead of smallpox after a reign of just 80 days. The city that had won was now leaderless. grief-stricken and gutted from the inside. Outside the valley, Cortés, alive, recovering, relentless, was rebuilding. And this time, he was going to take away the one thing that had saved the Aztecs before: the water itself. A city on a lake is a fortress, so Cortés built a navy. In the mountains, his men cut and fitted the timbers for 13 small warships, brigantines, then carried them piece by piece over the passes and launched them onto Lake Texcoco. In a single afternoon, the balance of a century flipped. The canoe fleets that had ruled the lake were shattered. The causeways that had trapped the Spanish in the dark now belonged to them. Then came the slow, deliberate strangling of 250,000 people. Cortés cut the great aqueduct, and the island city, surrounded by water it could not drink, began to die of thirst. His tens of thousands of indigenous allies pressed in along the causeways. For 93 days, through May, June, and July of 1521, the Aztecs fought for every canal and every rooftop, street by street, house by house, starving, sick, and out of arrows, and still they would not surrender. The wonder that had made grown soldiers wonder if they were dreaming was being ground, block by block, into rubble. And at its heart, a young last emperor was making a final stand. His name was Cuauhtemoc. Barely into his 20s, he had inherited a dying city and refused to let it die quietly. On the 13th of August, 1521, with the city gone and his people massacred in the streets, he tried to slip away across the lake by canoe. He was caught, brought before Cortés, and the resistance ended. 93 days of siege, 2 years of war, the largest city in the Americas, silenced. What followed was merciless. The Spanish and their allies looted and leveled it, pulled down its temples, and in time drained its lake and built a new capital on the bones of the old. Stand in the center of Mexico City today, and you are standing on Tenochtitlan. But before you file this away as the tale of a few brave conquistadors and a doomed empire, look again. It was not 500 Spaniards who brought down the Aztecs. It was tens of thousands of indigenous warriors settling their own scores. It was a disease that killed more people than any army could. It was a captive king, a night of greed, a woman who could speak, and 1,000 small chances that could each have gone the other way. The neat story of gods and omens and destiny was written afterward by the winners to turn a messy, allied, disease-driven catastrophe into fate. Strip that away, and what remains is harder to look at. One of the greatest cities on earth, destroyed in large part by its own subjects, and by an invisible speck too small to see. The gold that drowned those men is still down there, under the streets of a modern city, under a vanished lake. If you would walk through more lost worlds like this one, subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.